Have you ever been in a conversation with someone that you care about and everything starts out just fine? You're talking, you're catching up, maybe you're sharing something that you're thinking about, something that's just been on your mind, whether that's choices or something that's happened to you at work or in a relationship. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they say, "Yeah, I don't think that's right. I don't see it that way." It's a pretty simple sentence, but sometimes it can feel like the temperature in the room has just changed. Maybe your chest tightens a little bit and your mind starts running ahead in the conversation. Could it be that you're already building your response before they've even finished explaining what it is they mean? Because when someone disagrees with us, it doesn't always feel like they're disagreeing with an idea. Oftentimes, it can feel like they're disagreeing with us as a person. Now, in our heads, it can sound like they're saying you're wrong or you have no respect for my opinions, or it might even feel like they're just calling you an idiot. And just like that, the conversation can stop being about whatever you were talking about. And now it's about being heard or defending yourself. It's about trying to prove that you're not the person that they seem to think that you are. I think most of us have had an experience like that. Maybe you've had a disagreement with your partner about money, but you feel like you're trying to be responsible and you're trying to plan ahead, and they feel like you're letting fear make every decision. Now, neither one of you may be trying to hurt the other person, but you both walk away feeling misunderstood and hurt. Maybe you've had a friend say something that you didn't want to hear. They notice that you seem unhappy in your relationship or your job or some situation that you've been trying to convince yourself is fine. They ask a question and it just lands wrong. It could be that they didn't say it perfectly, they chose their words poorly. Maybe you feel judged. Maybe it feels like they don't know what they're talking about. But later, when you've had some space, you might realize that they noticed something that you didn't. Or, well, look, not every disagreement is healthy. Some people disagree because they want to control things. They want to shame you or insult you or just make you doubt yourself. Or they just keep you stuck in a conversation that was never really about understanding in the first place. You don't have to stay in those conversations. You don't have to argue with someone who's determined to make you feel bad. You don't have to debate your own humanity, and you don't have to keep explaining a boundary to someone who's already shown that they don't plan on respecting it. Okay, not every disagreement is an attack. Sometimes the person who sees something differently is giving us a chance to see a part of the picture that we might have missed, their perspective. They might be asking the question about what we're avoiding. They might be noticing a risk that we didn't think about. It could be that they're bringing a perspective that doesn't fit neatly into my own beliefs and perspectives. That doesn't mean that they're automatically right, and it doesn't mean that we have to change our mind. It most definitely doesn't mean that we have to abandon our values just to look open-minded, but it may mean that there's something worth looking at. It could be an assumption, and it could be a fear. Maybe it's a belief that we hold strongly but have never had to explain very clearly, maybe not even to ourselves. In the last few episodes, we've talked about critical thinking. We've talked about slowing down, checking our assumptions, looking for evidence, and considering alternative explanations, and then reflecting before we react. Well, today, I want to bring those skills into one of the places where they can be hardest to use, in a conversation with someone who disagrees with us. Because learning to disagree well isn't about being passive. It's not about letting people walk all over you or agreeing just to keep the peace. It's about learning how to stay grounded enough to hear a different perspective without immediately treating it as though it were a threat. It's about listening without losing yourself. It's about knowing when to stay open-minded and speak clearly, and then when to step away. So today, we're going to talk about the person who disagrees with you. Not because they always have the right answer and not because every disagreement is worth your time, but because sometimes if the conversation is respectful enough to stay in, the person across from you can help you see something that you wouldn't be seeing on your own. They have a different perspective. So I want to welcome you back to the podcast. I'm Lee Perry. I am the Pirate Therapist. Now, let's talk about disagreement. Why does disagreement feel so ominous? There's something about disagreement that can change the feeling in the room. You can be having a normal conversation. You could be laughing, having a good time, and just catching up with somebody, and everything is fine. And then somebody disagrees. They say, I see it differently. All of a sudden, the mood starts to shift. The room may not get loud, and nobody may say anything cruel, but it still gets heavier. It's like something's about to happen. That's why I like the word ominous here. Ominous doesn't mean something bad has already happened. It means it feels like something bad could happen. It's that feeling when the sky gets dark before a storm. You haven't felt the rain yet and you haven't heard the thunder, but you're looking around and you're wondering if you should get inside. That's what disagreement can feel like. Not just this person has a different opinion than I do, but I'm not sure where this is about to go. Are they going to get angry? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to try and make me feel stupid? Am I about to have to defend myself? And before the other person has even had a chance to explain what they mean, we can already start preparing for the worst. We start building our case. We start looking for the weak spot in what they're saying. We start thinking about what we need to say next. Or maybe we just go quiet. Perhaps we just decide there's no point in talking because we already know how this is going to end. And look, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. Congratulations, you're a human. It happens to all of us. Most of us have had disagreements that didn't go well. You could have grown up in a home where disagreements turned into yelling. Maybe you learned that asking a question got you criticized, or that you were told that you were too sensitive or too emotional, too difficult. You're just too much. Maybe you grew up in a family where there was one right way to think, believe, or vote, or just even see the world. And if you stepped outside of that, there were consequences. So now, when someone disagrees with you, your body may react before your mind has time to figure out whether this person is actually a threat. Your chest can tighten up, your thoughts start to speed up, and you feel like you need to protect yourself because some part of you remembers. It may not remember the details, and it may not even be a conscious memory, but it remembers what it felt like to be dismissed or criticized, embarrassed. So when someone says, I don't see it that way, your system may hear something very different than what they're saying. You could be hearing that you're wrong or you're not safe or you don't belong, that you're broken or you're stupid. You need to fix this before you get hurt. That's a lot for one sentence to carry. And sometimes it isn't just about our past. Sometimes disagreement feels ominous because our beliefs are connected to who we are. We like to think we form our beliefs by looking at the facts, thinking things through and choosing what makes the most sense. Well, sometimes we do, but a lot of our beliefs are tied to other things too. They can be tied to the way that we were raised and the beliefs that we had in our families growing up. They can be tied to our faith, our politics, our jobs, our communities, or just the people that we want to feel connected to. They can be tied to the kind of person that we believe that we are. So when someone questions a belief or a decision, it might feel like they're questioning more than a belief. It may feel like they're questioning our character. If someone questions the way you parent, you could be hearing that you're failing your child. If someone questions a decision you made at work, you might be hearing that you're stupid or incapable. And that may not be at all what they're trying to say, but it may be what the disagreement touches inside of you. And when it touches that place, it can be hard to stay open-minded. Listening can become more difficult. It can become really hard to ask, what are they seeing that I'm not seeing? And instead, we may start trying to prove that we're not wrong. We might try to prove that we're competent and that we're a good person and that we deserve respect. And again, there's nothing shameful about that. Being understood is important. Feeling respected is important. Feeling safe in our relationship matters. So when those things feel shaky, even in a small disagreement, can feel like there's a much bigger threat than there really is. Let me give you an example. Imagine two people who both care deeply about their family, but they disagree about money. One person believes every extra dollar should go into savings because life is unpredictable and they want to be prepared. The other person believes that there should be room to enjoy life now because they don't want fear to make every decision. So on the surface, they're arguing about money. But underneath it, one person might be trying to create safety and the other person might be trying to create freedom. They may both care about the same family and they both want a good life. They're both trying to love well. But when they don't understand what's underneath the other person's position, they can start seeing each other as careless or selfish, controlling, and irresponsible. And that's where the disagreement starts to feel more ominous, not because the conversation is impossible, but because both people start feeling unseen. Something else can happen here. When a disagreement feels ominous, we may judge ourselves for having such strong reactions. I could be thinking, why am I so upset? Why can't I just have a normal conversation? Why do I feel like I have to prove myself? But those questions can be a little unfair. Sometimes we aren't only reacting to this disagreement. Sometimes we're reacting to every disagreement that came before it. We're reacting to the time where we were laughed at for forgetting something or getting something wrong. We're reacting to the person who made us feel like our thoughts didn't matter, like we weren't important. We're reacting to the relationship where it never felt safe to say what we really thought. And that doesn't mean we're stuck there. It doesn't mean every disagreement is going to be harmful. It just means that we need to understand what may be happening inside of us before we can respond differently. Because if we can notice the moment when disagreement starts to feel ominous, we can create a little space. We can take a breath. We can allow the other person a chance to finish. We can ask ourselves, are they actually attacking me, or am I preparing for an attack because I've been hurt in the past? That doesn't mean that we ignore our instincts. It doesn't mean that we stay in a conversation that's disrespectful, manipulative, or cruel. If someone is trying to shame you, control you, or make you feel little, you're allowed to set a boundary and you are allowed to end that conversation. But when someone is trying, even imperfectly, to have a good faith conversation with you, there may be something on the other side of that first uncomfortable feeling. Maybe not agreement, maybe not an easy answer, but perspective. And sometimes perspective is exactly what we need because we don't grow by never being challenged. We grow when we learn how to meet a challenge without immediately losing ourselves in it. So I want you to hold on to this as we move forward. Disagreement can feel ominous because it touches our history, our identity, and our need to belong and our desire to be understood. But feeling ominous doesn't automatically mean dangerous. Sometimes it just means something meaningful has happened. And if we can stay grounded long enough to listen, we might find out that the person who disagrees with us isn't always bringing a storm into our lives. Sometimes they're just pointing out something on the horizon that we can't see from where we're standing. Before I go any further, I want to slow down and I want to make an important distinction. Not every disagreement is the same. Not every disagreement is harmful. And not all harm looks like disagreement. And that's important because we're talking about how disagreement can help us challenge our own thinking and expand our perspective. But I don't want anyone to hear that and think I'm saying every hard conversation is good for you. It's not. Sometimes disagreement is healthy and sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's the only honest thing available to us in that moment. And sometimes what looks like disagreement is really about control, intimidation, humiliation, or just one person trying to dominate the other person in that moment. See, those things aren't the same. Healthy disagreement tells us, I see differently. Can we talk about it? Whereas harmful disagreement says, I see differently. And now I need you to feel bad or stupid or guilty until you agree with me. Healthy disagreement can still be uncomfortable. It can involve frustration and emotions, and it can involve two people trying to find the right words because they care about the subject or because they care about each other. We're human. We aren't always at our best when we're tired or stressed or grieving, and we all can feel unheard at times. So healthy disagreement doesn't mean every conversation is calm and polished. And it doesn't mean that people aren't going to get frustrated. It doesn't mean that people say exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Boy, that's a skill I wish I had. What it does mean is there's still some basic respect underneath the disagreement. There's room for both people to speak. There's room for someone to say, hey, hold on a minute. I just need a second. There's room to make a mistake and still fix it. In a healthy disagreement, the issue is the issue. Maybe you disagree about money, parenting, or work decisions. Maybe you disagree about a boundary or how to handle something that's affecting both of you. But when the topic is difficult, you're still trying to deal with the problem. You aren't trying to destroy the other person. That's a big difference. When a disagreement becomes harmful, the goal usually changes. It may start as a conversation about money, parenting, and work or relationships, but somewhere along the way, it stops being about finding a solution. Now it's about power. It's about getting the upper hand and control. It's about making the other person regret that they were even speaking. It's now about proving that one person is smarter or more reasonable, more moral, or just entitled to be heard. And when that becomes the pattern, we're no longer talking about a disagreement that's just uncomfortable. We're talking about something that can do real harm and potentially silence someone's voice. One of the clearest signs of this is contempt. Contempt is not simply saying I disagree. Contempt is when someone uses their words, their tone, their sarcasm, eye rolling, or insults just to make it clear that they think they're above you. It's when the message becomes, I'm not disagreeing with your position, I'm looking down on you as a person. And that's really hard to have a healthy disagreement with someone who's treating you that way. So let me give you an example. Imagine you and your partner are talking about a purchase. One person wants to buy something now, the other person is worried about the budget. A healthy disagreement might sound like this. I know this matters to you, and I understand why you want it. I'm worried about what it does to our budget. We can look at it together and figure out what feels responsible for both of us. Now, that conversation might still feel tense. One person might be disappointed and the other person might feel anxious, but neither person may get exactly what they want. But both people are still getting treated like people. Both perspectives are allowed space in the same conversation. The goal isn't to win at the other's expense. The goal is to figure out how to deal with the problems together. Now, compare that with this. You're so irresponsible, you never think about anyone but yourself. I can't believe I have to explain basic adult behavior to you. Now we're not talking about the purchase anymore. We're attacking someone's character. And when we're being attacked, it's really hard to stay open-minded and listen. It's hard to hear what the other person is saying in that situation. It's hard to think clearly. Most of us will either fight back, shut down, or start trying to prove that we aren't as bad as the other person thinks we are. The distinction is really important here. You can't use harmful interaction as a healthy tool for growth when the conversation is designed to make you feel powerless. You can't expand your perspective while someone is actively trying to minimize your contributions. There's another kind of harm that can be harder to recognize because it may not look so dramatic from the outside. See, sometimes a person disagrees with you in a way that makes you question your own memory, your perception, your judgment. When you're being gaslit, you could say that hurt me, and they say you're too sensitive. You could say that's not what happened. And they say, yeah, you always make things up. You might give a statement such as, I need you to stop talking to me that way. And their response would be, you're the reason I have to talk to you this way. It's not productive disagreement. It isn't someone challenging your thinking. It isn't an invitation to examine a blind spot. It may be an attempt to avoid responsibility by making you doubt yourself. Look, harm doesn't always come with yelling. Sometimes it's quiet. It shows up as repeated blame, manipulation, humiliation, intimidation, isolation. The lexicon can go on. Or, it could be someone constantly trying to convince you that your thoughts and feelings just can't be trusted. That's not simply two people who disagree. That's a pattern that can leave someone confused, afraid, feeling disconnected from their own sense of reality. And I want to say this very clearly. You don't have to prove you've hurt enough before you take control of your discomfort. You don't have to wait for the conversation to become unbearable before you decide you need a boundary. You don't have to remain in an argument because someone says they're just being honest. I hate that phrase. Honesty without tact is just cruelty. And that's a quote from Mark Twain. And saying that I'm just telling the truth isn't a free pass to demean the other person. Someone can say something that's difficult and still do it with respect. Someone can be direct without being degrading. Someone can challenge my thinking without trying to control me. The question isn't simply do we disagree? The question is what's happening between us while we disagree? Are both people able to speak? Are both people allowed to have their own perspective? Can either person take a break without being punished for it? Is there any effort to understand even when there is an agreement? Can someone apologize if they've caused someone else pain? Can a boundary be expressed and be respected? Or does one person always have to give in for the conversation to end? Those questions can tell us a lot more than the volume of the conversation. A calm voice can still be controlling. Someone can sound logical and still dismiss every feeling that we have. It's possible that someone can say, I'm only trying to help while repeatedly crossing your boundaries that you have clearly set. Now, on the other hand, two people can be emotional, frustrated, and still work through a disagreement in a basically healthy way if there is respect, accountability, and a willingness to fix things. Let's jump into another example. Imagine your friend disagrees with the decision that you're making. Now, they may not like it, and they may tell you that they're worried. They might even ask questions that you don't enjoy answering. But a good friend might say, look, I'm worried about you. I'm worried about what this could cost you. And I might be wrong, and I know it's your decision, but I don't want to pretend that I don't have concerns. Now, that might be uncomfortable to hear. You may decide your friend doesn't fully understand your situation, and you might still make the same decision. But notice what they're doing. They're naming their concern, they're owning the fact that they could be wrong, and they're respecting your autonomy. They're allowing you to remain the person responsible for your life and your choices. Now, a harmful person would sound probably very different. If you make that decision, don't come crying to me when you ruin your life. You never listen. You always have to learn everything the hard way. That's not concern, that's contempt wrapped in prediction. And when someone repeatedly speaks to you that way, the issue isn't whether their advice contains a useful point. The issue is a pattern of disrespect and emotional harm. And this is where boundaries become very important. A boundary isn't a demand that the other person become who you want them to be. A boundary is a statement about what you will and won't participate in. It may sound something like this: I'm willing to talk about this, but I'm not willing to be insulted. Or, I hear that you disagree. If we can't speak respectfully, I'm going to end this conversation for now. Those aren't threats and they're not punishments. They're just ways of protecting the conditions that make a real conversation possible, because healthy disagreement requires some basic emotional safety. We don't have to be perfectly safe. We're not looking to be coddled. Not the guarantee that nobody's going to feel uncomfortable or the promise that nobody's going to be challenged, but enough safety to speak honestly without being mocked or threatened or emotionally torn down for feeling that way. So as we move forward, I want you to keep this distinction close. Healthy disagreement can be difficult and still be useful. Harm can still be quiet and still be very damaging. Healthy disagreement says we have a problem to work through, whereas harmful disagreement says you are the problem. Healthy disagreement asks, how can we understand this better? Whereas harm says, how can I make you give in? Healthy disagreement leaves room for dignity. Harm tries to remove that dignity. And knowing the difference helps us to make better choices. It helps us to know when to stay open-minded. It helps us to know when we can speak clearly. And it helps us to know when the healthiest thing we can do is stop trying to be understood by someone who has no interest in understanding us. Because not every disagreement deserves more of you. But the disagreements rooted in respect, honesty, and good faith can teach us a great deal about the other person, about the problem that's in front of us, and about ourselves. Now that we've talked about the difference between disagreement and harm, I want to talk about something that may sound a little strange at first. Disagreement can be a gift. Not every disagreement, not every person who disagrees with us, and not every conversation is something that we need to keep trying to work through. But when disagreement comes from a place of respect and curiosity and good faith, it can give us something agreement usually can't. It can show us what we can't see on our own. Most of us spend a lot of time around people and ideas that are familiar to us. That's not always a bad thing. It feels good to be understood. It feels good to be around people who share our values, our experiences, or the way that we see the world. Sometimes that kind of connection is exactly what we need. We all need people to make us feel seen, to make us feel heard. We all need those places where we don't have to explain every part of ourselves before we're allowed to belong. If everyone around us agrees with us all the time, we can start confusing what feels familiar with what's true. We can start thinking that because an idea feels right, it must be right. And we can start believing that because no one has challenged us, that there's nothing left to think about. Well, that's just not true. We all have blind spots. We're not bad people and we're not necessarily smart or dumb. We're just people. We all have blind spots because we're humans. We only know what we've experienced. We only know what we've been taught and what we've noticed. We only know what we've had the chance to learn. Someone else may have lived something that we haven't lived. That's a guarantee, actually. I guarantee everybody else has experienced some things that you haven't. They may have seen a consequence that we haven't seen or have information that we've never experienced. They may be looking at the same issue from a completely different perspective. That doesn't mean they're automatically right. It may mean that they're holding a piece of the picture that we don't have. And that's the gift inside of a positive disagreement. It gives us a chance to pause and ask, is there something here that I'm not seeing? That's not weakness and it's not indecisiveness. It doesn't mean that we're giving someone else control over our thinking. It just means we're willing to admit something that's true for all of us. None of us have the whole picture. That's what intellectual humility is really about. It's not about thinking less of yourself. It isn't about walking around unsure of everything that you believe. And it's not about pretending every opinion is equally informed and equally helpful. It's about recognizing that we can be wrong sometimes. It's about realizing that we have limits. It's about being open enough to consider that another person may understand something that we don't. You can have strong values and still be open minded. And you can have a clear opinion and still ask sincere questions. You can believe you're right and still be willing to listen. These things can exist together. They should exist together. Because if a belief can't survive respectful questioning, then maybe it hasn't had a chance to become as strong as we think it is. Positive disagreement doesn't always change our minds. Sometimes it just helps clarify our minds. Somebody challenges something we believe. We listen, we think about it, we look at the information, and after all of that, we still come back to the same conclusion. But now we understand why we believe it. Now we know which parts are based in evidence and which parts may be based on emotion, could be fear or habit or just plain old familiarity. But now we can say, I've considered another perspective and I still believe that this is where I stand. That's not stubbornness necessarily. That's a belief that's been questioned, it's been tested. And there's a difference between holding on to something because nobody's ever challenged it and holding on to something because you've looked at it carefully. One is comfort, the other is confidence. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're at work and you've spent a lot of time putting together a plan. You thought about it, you put the effort into it, you did the work. You may even be proud of it. Then somebody says, I think there's something that might be missing. Well, that can be really frustrating because you're thinking, oh, here we go. They always have something negative to say. And you may feel like they're just trying to tear your idea apart. But maybe they're seeing something that you didn't see. Perhaps they're noticing a problem that could affect people who aren't in the meeting. Maybe the plan will still work, it just needs an adjustment. It could be that you've done good work, but someone else can help you make it better. That disagreement doesn't mean you failed. It means the idea has a chance to become even stronger. That's what another perspective can do for you. It doesn't always replace yours. Sometimes it just refines it. It adds something that was missing. It helps us to see where our confidence was based on an assumption instead of all the information. And that's not a loss, that's growth. There's also something positive disagreement can give us in our relationships. When two people can disagree without treating each other like enemies, they learn something very important. They learn that the relationship can hang and still be with those differences. That's important. A lot of people have learned that being close to someone means agreeing with them. They may have learned that if they say what they really think, they're getting punished for it. It could be that they've learned that disagreement leads to yelling and distance and shame and someone storming out of the house. So they become careful. They agree when they don't agree and they stay quiet when it's important that they speak up. They make themselves feel smaller just to try and keep the peace. But look, that isn't peace. That's fear wearing a peaceful face. A healthy relationship doesn't require two people to think exactly alike. It requires enough respect and safety for two people to be honest without believing that the relationship is going to fall apart. Let me give you another example. Imagine you tell a close friend, I love you, but I see the situation differently. That can be a hard question to hear from someone that you care about. But if you're willing to stay open-minded and ask questions and make it clear that you still care about them, something really important can happen here. You may not end up agreeing, and you might not solve everything in one conversation, but you both leave room knowing something a little bit deeper. You learn that I can be honest with this person. I can have a different point of view and still be treated with respect from this person. You might learn that this relationship can handle the real me. Now that's being seen. That is valuable. Now, not every disagreement brings people closer. Sometimes disagreement shows us that our values can be very, very different. Sometimes it shows us that a boundary needs to be set. And sometimes it just shows us that the relationship can't continue in the same way. That's hard, but it's still information and it's real information. And when a disagreement is respectful enough to stay in, it can give us a chance to understand the other person without having to mold into their beliefs and values or them doing the same for us. It can help us to move away from simple stories about people because it's easy to look at somebody who disagrees with us and decide we know exactly who they are. No, they're selfish or they don't care. They're just dumb, they're uninformed, or they're just too emotional. They're trying to make things difficult. They're always negative. Sometimes people do act selfishly, and sometimes people don't have enough information. Sometimes people aren't careful with their words. But when we reduce someone to one simple explanation, we're no longer open minded. We've stopped asking what they value. We've stopped asking after their experience, and we're not asking what they're afraid of. And we stop seeing that they may be trying to solve a problem that we care about too, just from a different direction. You don't have to agree with someone's conclusion to understand how they got there. You could ask, what happened to make you feel that way? You could ask, what is it that you're worried about? Another good question to ask is, what matters to you most in this situation? Those questions don't mean you're giving up your own perspective. They're helping you to understand the other person's. And the more clearly you understand where someone's coming from, the more accurately you can respond. You can still disagree and you can still hold boundaries. You can still decide that their conclusion doesn't work for you, but you're responding to the actual person in front of you and not the version of them that you've created in your head. There's one more thing I want to mention here. Positive disagreement can help protect us from groupthink, from joining an echo chamber. Groupthink is what happens when a group becomes so focused on keeping agreement that people stop asking challenging questions. Nobody wants to be the difficult one, and nobody wants to slow things down. Nobody wants to say, I'm not sure this is a good idea. We see the examples of this in the news all the time. So everyone agrees, or at least stays quiet. From the outside, it might look like peace, but it's not peace. Could be fear, could be pressure. It might be people deciding it's easier to go along than to be honest. And this can happen anywhere, work, families, friend groups. It can happen anywhere people are afraid that disagreement will cost them some kind of human connection. And when nobody feels safe enough to say, hang on a second, important things are getting missed. A different perspective might point out a risk that we're not seeing. A question might slow down a bad decision and prevent us from running off a cliff. Someone's concern might help the whole group avoid making mistakes. And that doesn't mean every disagreement is going to be helpful. It doesn't mean every person who disagrees is offering wisdom. It does mean that we shouldn't be so afraid of disagreement that we lose the chance to learn from it. So what do we do with all this? Start small. The next time someone disagrees with you, you don't have to immediately decide whether they're right or wrong. You don't have to agree with them, and you don't have to defend yourself before you know what they mean. Simply ask, what might they be seeing that I'm not? That question can open a door. Maybe there's nothing useful on the other side, and could be that you'll listen and still decide that you disagree. But maybe you'll find a question that you hadn't addressed yourself. You could find information that you didn't have. And maybe you'll find a better understanding of the other person. Maybe you'll find out that your own belief becomes stronger because you were willing to let it be challenged. And that's the gift inside of positive disagreement. It's not that the other person gets to tell us who we are, and it's not that we have to change our minds every time someone challenges us. That's it. Sometimes the other person can help us see ourselves in a world just a little bit more clearly. They don't have the whole truth, but neither do we. And if we can remember that, disagreement doesn't have to be something that we fear. Sometimes it can be one of the ways that we grow. When we argue with someone, we usually think we're defending an idea. We think we're defending our opinions, our decisions, our point of view, or just basic understanding of what's been happening. And sometimes that's exactly what we're doing. Maybe we're talking about a decision at work or talking about money, but it doesn't matter what. It could be parenting, relationships. I don't care. It could be anything. And on the surface, we're talking about the issue. But underneath that issue, there's often something else going on. Sometimes we aren't just defending an idea. Sometimes we're defending our identity. Sometimes we're defending our pride. When we're defending our need to feel competent, respected, responsible, informed, like we belong. And that's why disagreement can go from calm to heated so quickly. Because someone may question what we said, but what we hear is much bigger than their words. They say, I'm not sure that plan will work, but what we're hearing inside of our head is you don't know what's going on. They say, I think you could have handled that differently. And what we hear in our head is you're a bad parent. You are not good at your job. They could say something as simple as, I just see it differently. But what we're hearing is that you're dumb, you're selfish, or you don't belong here. That may not be at all what they meant, but it may be what their disagreement touches inside of us. Once that happens, the conversation can stop being about understanding the issue. Now it's about protecting ourselves. We start gathering evidence. We start getting more certain. We start interrupting, getting louder. We look for the weakest thing that they said because it's the easiest to fight than to look at the strongest part of their point. Maybe we just shut down because some part of us decides that if we can't be completely right, we don't want to be a part of this conversation at all. And look, that doesn't make us bad people and it doesn't make us weak. It doesn't mean that we're incapable of thinking clearly. It means being wrong can feel very personal. For a lot of us, being wrong has come with a cost. Maybe you grew up in a home where getting something wrong meant getting yelled at. Or maybe you were embarrassed at school when you answered a question incorrectly. Maybe somebody made you feel stupid just for opening up and asking a question. It could be that you're in a relationship where your mistakes got brought up again and again, even after you had apologized and tried to make it right. So later, when someone questions us, we may not be only reacting to that one moment. We may be reacting to every moment before it when being wrong meant being embarrassed, rejected, feeling unsafe, or just disconnected. It's important to understand this because if we don't know what we're defending, we can get really good at defending it without ever asking whether it even needs to be defended. We can defend a position because it's familiar. We might defend a decision because we've already invested time, money, hope, or pride into it. We may defend an opinion because changing it could make us feel disloyal to the people who taught us to hold it. And we may defend a habit because it's become part of the story that we're telling ourselves about who we are. Sometimes we defend a belief because if we let it go, we don't know what would replace it. That uncertainty can feel scary. Certainty feels safe, even when it's not complete. Familiarity can feel safer than being open-minded. But this is where we need to be honest with ourselves and why we're trying to understand what's true. Are we trying to understand what's true, or are we trying to protect a version of ourselves that needs to be right? There's something in psychology called motivated reasoning. Now, that sounds a little clinical, but the basic idea is pretty simple. Sometimes we look at information in a way that helps us to reach the answer we already want to reach. We may look harder for problems in information that challenges what we believe. We may accept information that agrees with us without questioning it as much. And when that belief is tied to a group we belong to or an identity we care about, it can get even stronger. We may not just be defending an idea. We may be defending a feeling of being part of the group, our family, our faith, our community, or the kind of person that we want to believe that we are. And that doesn't mean people are intentionally lying to themselves. Most of us don't wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to ignore everything that makes me feel uncomfortable. It's usually a lot quieter than that. We might honestly believe that we're being objective. We might feel like we're just looking at the facts, but we may be looking at those facts through a filter that could be shaped by fear, loyalty, or shame. A filter shaped by our need to believe that we are a good person. Those filters are usually easier to see in other people. We can often tell when somebody else is getting defensive. We can hear it in their voice. We can see it in their body language. We can see it when they change the subject, dismiss a question, or just bring up something unrelated because they don't want to sit with what's being said. But it's a lot harder to notice our own defensiveness when we're in the middle of it. This is why when we pause, it's really important to pause. Not a pause to agree because the conversation's uncomfortable. A pause to give you time to ask yourself, what is it that I'm defending right now? It could be that you're defending your belief, and that's okay. You may have a good reason for it, but it could be that the answer is I'm defending my pride. Maybe it's I'm defending the fact that I've already made this choice and I'm scared that I have made a mistake. It could be I'm defending my place in my family. You might just be defending the idea that I'm a good parent, a good partner, a good employee, or just plain old good person. Those answers can be hard to admit, but they don't make us bad. They make us more aware, and awareness gives us choices. So for example, imagine you've been working on a proposal at your job. You spent a lot of time on it. You put energy into it. You might even be proud of it. Maybe you're hoping it will show people that you're capable, creative, and someone who can be trusted to do bigger things. Then in a meeting, someone jumps in and says, I think we need to look at this part again. I'm worried it could create a problem for the people who have to use it every day. Your first reaction might be they're trying to tear my idea apart, or they don't respect the effort and the intelligence I have that I've put into this. And maybe they aren't saying it perfectly. Maybe their timing isn't great, and maybe they could have been more thoughtful in how they brought it up. But if you can pause, if you can realize that you aren't defending the proposal, you might be defending your competence. You might be defending your need to be seen as someone who is capable and has good ideas. And once you see that, you have more choices. You can say, look, I don't agree with that concern. You can still explain your reasoning, but you can also ask, what problem is it that you're seeing? That doesn't weaken your position. It gives your position a chance to become stronger. So let me give you another example. Imagine someone close to you says, I think you've been carrying too much lately. I'm worried that you're exhausted. At first, you may argue with them. I'm fine. I've got it under control. You don't understand how much I have to do. And maybe all of that is true. Maybe you do have a lot to manage. Maybe they don't fully understand everything you're dealing with. But maybe their concern touches something a little deeper. Maybe you've built a part of your identity around being the reliable one, the strong one, the one who gets things done, the one who doesn't need help. If you admit that you're exhausted, it may feel like you're admitting that you're failing. But exhaustion is not failure. Needing help is not failure. And listening to someone who cares about you doesn't mean you have to give up the strengths that have helped you to get through all of those hard things. It may just mean you need to be honest about the cost of carrying everything alone. That's where we can practice something that's critical. We can practice self-respect that doesn't depend on always being right. I can be a good person and still make a mistake. I can be competent and still learn more. I can hold strong values and still be missing some information. I can listen to someone's criticism without accepting it as cruelty. I can change my mind without losing my identity and who I am. Now, that last one is really important. A lot of people have been taught, directly or indirectly, that changing their mind means that they are weak or inconsistent, gullible, or untrustworthy. But changing your mind because you've learned something is not weakness. It's a sign that you are alive and that you're paying attention. It's a sign that you're willing to grow. There's a difference between being easily pushed around and being open to new information. There's a difference between abandoning your values and refining your understanding of how to live them out. You don't have to let another person tell you what to think, but you can let their disagreement show you where your thinking may deserve another look. It can help to remember that one hard conversation, one imperfect decision, or one mistake doesn't define your whole worth. You're more than one thing you got wrong. You're more than the choice that you're reconsidering, and you're definitely more than the opinion you held before you had the information. The next time you notice yourself arguing hard, getting defensive, or feeling like you just need to prove your point at all costs, try asking yourself a few questions. What is it that I'm defending? Is this really about the issue, or is this about how this makes me feel about myself? What would it mean to me if this person were partly right? What am I afraid to admit? What part of me feels threatened here? Now, you may not like the answers, and you may decide that the other person is mistaken. You could decide that their point is incomplete, uninformed, or doesn't fit your particular situation. But you can still ask those questions before you react. Just create that space. You create the space between the feeling of being challenged and what you do next. And in that space, you can choose something other than automatic defense. You can choose to be open-minded. You can choose clarity, and you can choose clarifying questions. You can choose a boundary. You can choose to say, I just need a little time to think about. These are values worth defending, because the goal isn't to become someone who never defends anything. You know, there are boundaries worth defending, and there are people worth defending. There are things that are important enough for us to stand up for. The goal is to become more honest about what's actually happening inside of us when we argue. Are we defending truth? Are we defending value? Are we defending a boundary? Or are we defending an identity that feels too fragile to let that question get close? The more clearly we can answer that question, the more freedom we're going to have. And the more freedom we have, the less likely we are to treat every disagreement like a threat to who we are. One of the more difficult things to do in a disagreement is to listen. Not just hear the words, but listen. Listening includes trying to understand the other person, not just taking in noise. Don't just wait quietly until the other person stops talking so you can explain why they're wrong. Don't just listen for the one weak point that you can use to prove your side. That's not listening. Actually listen. For a lot of people, that can feel like surrender. It can feel like if I listen to them, I'm admitting that they're right. If I try to understand them, I'm giving up my own point of view. If I don't fight back right away, they're going to think that they've won. But listening is not surrender. Understanding isn't agreement. Being open minded isn't weakness, and making room for someone else's perspective doesn't mean that there's no room for your own. That's what this part is really about. How do we listen to someone without losing ourselves in what they think? How do we hear their point of view without handing them the will and letting them decide what it is that we believe or value or what we're allowed to feel? When we don't know how to listen without surrendering, we usually end up in one of two extremes. We either fight and argue every point and interrupt, we get defensive, or we're so busy protecting ourselves that we never really understand what the other person is trying to say. Or we do the opposite. We disappear. We agree too quickly or minimize what we actually think, and we let the other person's certainty take up all the space in the conversation. We tell ourselves it's easier to keep the peace, even when keeping the peace means we have to leave ourselves behind. Look, neither one of those things really helps us. Fighting everything doesn't help us understand, and disappearing doesn't help us feel respected. So the goal should be somewhere in the middle. The goal is to be open without being unprotected, to be open-minded without being naive, and to be respectful without losing our voice. To be able to say, I hear you without pretending that I agree with you. Now, that can take practice. When someone disagrees with us, our first instinct is often to respond to their conclusion. And they say, I don't think that was the right decision. And we respond with, well, you just don't understand. They could say, I'm worried about where this is going, and we're countering with, you're overreacting. Before we know it, we're explaining why they're wrong before we've even asked how they got to their conclusion. But their conclusion is only part of what we can see. Underneath it might be concern. It could be any number of things on their end: fear, values, experiences that they've had that we didn't, or just plain old a need that they have that they need to express. Maybe it's information that we just don't have. So instead of reacting right away to the conclusion, it can help us to understand the path that brought them there. What you could do is ask, can you help me understand what it is you mean? Can you use different words to explain it so to help me understand? Or what is it that you're concerned about? These questions don't mean you agree. They just give you more information. And the more information you have, the better chance you have of responding to what they actually mean instead of responding to what you assume that they mean. One of the simplest ways to show someone that you're listening is reflective listening, to reflect back what you think you heard. You might say, so what I'm hearing is that you aren't trying to control this decision. You're worried I might be taking on more than I can manage. Is that correct? And that does a couple of things. It lets the other person know if you misunderstood them, and it can slow the conversation down. Instead of both people reacting to assumptions, you have a chance to make sure you're actually talking about the same thing. Here's a key part. After you've listened, you are still allowed to have a response. You can say, I understand that you're worried I'm taking on too much, and I appreciate that you care. I also see this differently. Now, I want to explain why. That's not defensive or dismissive. It's certainly not surrender. You're being clear and honest. You're being assertive without being aggressive. It's important to know the difference. Being assertive doesn't mean being loud. You shouldn't be trying to overpower somebody. It doesn't mean that you have to make them feel small so they stop disagreeing with you. What it does mean is that you can always say what you think, what you need, and where your boundaries are without acting like the other person's thoughts and feelings don't matter. You can be clear without being cruel. You can be firm and still be respectful. It is possible to disagree without trying to control the other person. And you can set a boundary without apologizing for having one. Sometimes listening without surrendering yourself starts before the conversation even begins. It starts with knowing what's yours to decide. Not every disagreement is a group decision, and not every person gets an equal vote in your life. People may have opinions about your relationships, your work, your money, your health, your boundaries, even your beliefs, or just the way you spend your time. And some of those opinions, they can be helpful. And they may come to you from people who love you. Some may come from an experience that someone's had that you didn't. But advice is not authority, and concern is not control. Another person being uncomfortable with your decision doesn't automatically mean you've made the wrong decision. You're allowed to listen carefully and still say, I hear you. I hear your perspective and your concern, but I'm going to go in a different direction. That can be hard, especially if you've been taught that having boundaries is selfish or that disappointing people means that you've done something wrong. A boundary is not an attack, it's not a punishment, and it's not about controlling someone else's feelings. A boundary is a simple and clear statement about what you will and what you won't participate in. It's about what you need and about what you're willing to do to take care of yourself. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're talking with a family member about some personal decision. Could be a career choice, a relationship choice. Well, let's just say that they strongly disagree. They could be worried or disappointed. They may believe that they know what's best for you, and part of what they say is worth considering. Instead of immediately defending yourself, you could say, I can hear that you're concerned. I know that you want me to be safe, and I can appreciate that. I've thought about this carefully, and I'm going to make this decision. I'm willing to talk about your concerns, but I'm not willing to keep defending my right to make this choice. That does not insult them, and it doesn't pretend that their worry doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It doesn't require them to approve of your decision. But it allows two things to be true at once. They can have their perspective, and you can still have your autonomy. And that's what listening without surrendering looks like. Here's another example. Imagine you're talking with your best friend about something that matters to both of you. Maybe it's a value. Maybe it's something happening in the world that you both have strong feelings about. Now, that conversation can get tense. You can feel yourself getting overwhelmed. Your heart rate goes up. You stop hearing what they're saying because you're so focused on what you want to say next. You may want to lash out, or you might want to agree just to make the discomfort stop. But instead, what you could say is, I want to understand your point of view, but I'm getting so worked up right now. I'm getting too worked up to listen. And I need to take a break and come back to this when I can actually hear what you're trying to say and explain my side clearly. That's not avoiding the conversation. Sometimes it's the responsible thing to do. Take a time out. You're not ending the relationship. You're not saying that they're wrong. You're recognizing that you can't have a meaningful conversation while your body and mind are in survival mode. Taking a break can protect the relationship from the words that you don't mean. It can protect you from agreeing to something simply because you feel pressured into it at that moment. Listening also means listening to yourself. And I know that may sound a little strange, but it's an important skill. Pay attention to what's happening inside of you while the other person is talking. Do you feel respected, even if you disagree? Do you feel like you have room to speak? Do you feel pressured to agree? Do you feel like you're starting to doubt your own memory or your own right to have a feeling? These reactions are information. They don't always tell you exactly what to do, but they can help you decide whether the conversation is safe enough to continue. Emotional discomfort isn't the same thing as emotional danger. A respectful disagreement can make us uncomfortable because it challenges a belief, a habit, or something that we just feel strongly about. But if a conversation regularly leaves you feeling humiliated or manipulated or unable to trust your own perception, that is more than discomfort. That might be a sign that the conversation has moved beyond a healthy disagreement. In those moments, listening doesn't mean staying. Listening to yourself means saying, I am not willing to continue this conversation while I am being spoken to this way. Or it could say that I understand that you disagree. I hear you, but I'm not willing to keep discussing this. These statements are not hostile. They're clear, and clarity is kind when the alternative is resentment, pretending, or staying in a conversation that is no longer respectful. Now, there's another part that's worth talking about, and we need to be careful not to confuse empathy with responsibility. You can understand why someone feels the way they feel without taking responsibility for fixing it. You can see someone is disappointed without changing your decision just to make their disappointment go away. And you can acknowledge someone's fear without allowing that fear to become the compass for your life. You can care about someone and still say no. That's not cold. That's a sign of maturity. Sometimes people respond to a boundary by getting upset. They might say you're selfish or that you've changed. And they may say that you don't care anymore. And that can hurt, especially when the person matters to you. But another person's discomfort with your boundary doesn't prove that your boundary is wrong. It might just mean that they're used to having access to you in a way that doesn't work for you anymore. Listening with strength means that you can hear their disappointment without rushing to make it disappear. You can say, I understand that you're upset and I'm not trying to hurt you, but I'm not able to do what you're asking right now. That sentence makes room for compassion and self respect at the same time. That's really what we're talking about here. You can make a real effort to understand someone without becoming them. You can ask questions without giving up your own judgment. You can be open minded without turning into a people pleaser. And you can care about someone's feelings without taking responsibility for them. You can still be curious and still have boundaries. You can listen and still say no. You don't have to surrender the helm whenever somebody disagrees with you. You can listen to what they see from their side of the ship. You get to decide what's useful and you can leave out the rest. You get to choose the direction that you want your life to go. Well, we've covered a lot already. We've talked about why disagreement can feel ominous. We've talked about the difference between disagreement and harm. And we've talked about how respectful disagreement can sometimes help us see things we wouldn't have seen on our own. We've also talked about how easy it is to get defensive, to protect our identity, our pride, our history, and the version of ourselves that we want other people to see. That's all helpful to understand. Most disagreements don't happen when they're sitting quietly with a notebook, feeling rested and emotionally grounded, and ready to respond with wisdom. They happen when we're tired. They happen when we're stressed out. When we've had a long day, they happen in the middle of the most inconvenient times, like the middle of the workday or a family gathering, or a text message might just catch us off guard. And when that happens, it's easy to forget everything we know. So remember to slow down. We need to remember to be open-minded, and we need to know that we shouldn't assume we understand what the other person's intentions or meanings are. But in that moment, we can still feel our heart rate go up and our body start preparing for an argument. I want to give you something simple to remember. It's not something that's going to make every disagreement easy. And I can't give you anything to make all disagreements easy, but something that can help you stay grounded when you feel yourself getting pulled off course. It's another acronym. I call it SAIL, just because we're staying with the theme here. Because when disagreements start getting through, we don't always need to win. Sometimes we just need to keep our bearings. SAIL. Slow down, ask what matters, investigate your assumptions, and look for opportunities to learn. So let's break it down. Yes, slow down. The first step is to slow down. I know, easier said than done. Because when someone disagrees with us, we often speed up without even realizing it. Our thoughts speed up, our voice speeds up. We may even start preparing our response before the other person has even finished talking. Or we might do the opposite. We may shut down and go quiet, or decide that the conversation is over before we know what they mean. Either way, some part of us is trying to protect us. So slowing down isn't about pretending that you're calm. It isn't about forcing yourself to smile while someone else says something that irritates you. It's simply about giving yourself a little space, taking time to think, and listen before you react. Now, that might be one breath, and it might be letting the other person finish their sentence. Remember to listen, to understand, and not to respond. It might mean saying, give me a second. I want to think about what you said. I just need to process that for a moment. It could be, I can feel myself getting defensive and I don't want to respond before I understand what you mean. There's a lot of maturity in that. You're not giving in and you're not just agreeing. You're deciding that your first reaction doesn't get to control the whole conversation and your behavior. And that's what slowing down does for you. It gives you choices. Because if we react instantly, we're often reacting from the part of us that's feeling threatened. When we slow down, we give more thoughtful part of us time to join the conversation. A, ask what matters. The second step is to ask what matters, not just what they say, but what are they trying to say? What is the meaning underneath the words that they chose? What is it that they're worried about? People don't always say what they mean in the clearest of ways. Sometimes they don't even know what they mean to until we ask. Someone may say, I don't think you should do that. But what we hear is, you think I'm making a bad decision. But underneath it, they may be worried about something else entirely. They might be afraid you're going to get hurt or concerned at the cost of your decision. It doesn't mean they're automatically right, and it doesn't mean that their concern gets to make your decision for you. But understanding what matters to them helps you respond to the actual concern instead of only reacting to the words on the surface. A good, simple phrase for you to learn. Can you help me understand what it is that you're seeing here? What's your perspective? Those are simple questions, but they can change the entire direction of a conversation. Instead of one person defending their position and the other person defending theirs, you start learning what's underneath both positions. That's where the productive conversation takes place. The third step in SAIL, to investigate your assumptions. This is where you have to turn the light back towards yourself. When someone disagrees with us, it's easy to decide we know exactly why. They're trying to control me, or they're trying to say they think that they're smarter than me. Sometimes, to be clear, people are being judgmental, they're being controlling or dismissive. This isn't about talking yourself out of what you can clearly see, but sometimes our minds start filling in the blanks before we've got all the information. We end up hearing another person's words through our own historical filters based on our lived experiences. We color their meaning by telling ourselves that they are like the last person who made us feel small. We use our past experiences to assume meaning as we experienced when we were dismissed or criticized or told that we were wrong, before we realize that we're responding to something that they may not actually have said. So it might help to ask yourself, am I listening to understand, or am I allowing my filters from past experiences to assume their meaning and respond without understanding where this other person is at? Am I reacting to what they said, or am I reacting to what I think they meant? Am I assuming they're attacking me because I feel attacked? And then there's another side to this coin. What am I assuming about myself? Am I assuming that if I'm questioned, I must be seen as incompetent? Now, these are big questions. Look, you don't have to answer them all in the middle of the conversations. Sometimes simply noticing that assumption can lower the temperature inside your head. You can say, when you said that, I heard it as a criticism. Is that what you meant? Now, that can take some courage to say that to people, but the other person might say no, and they might say yes. But either way, you have more information than you had a moment before, and that helps you decide to do what to do next. And the last step, L, this is where we ask, what can I take from this? Not how can I make them admit that I'm right, but is there something worth considering here in this statement? We are all only given one perspective. People will see things differently than us. Understanding their perspective will lead to a broader perspective and help us make better choices. Even if you end up deciding to do what you had originally planned, you can feel more secure in that decision by seeing someone else's perspective. Maybe they're pointing out a risk that you hadn't considered. It could be they're naming a consequence that you can't see from where you're standing. You might learn that it has nothing to do with the issue itself. And maybe you learn that this person is more worried about you than you realized. Maybe you learn that you and this person aren't able to talk through certain things without getting hurt. It could be that you just simply learned that this conversation isn't healthy for me to continue. That's still learning. Understand that not every disagreement has a beautiful resolution. It's never going to be all rainbows and puppies. If a disagreement is respectful enough to stay in, looking for an opportunity to learn can help us turn our discomfort into something useful. It can help us ask, what is this moment teaching me? Let me give you an example. Imagine you're talking with someone close to you about some decision you're making. Maybe you're considering a move or some big expenditure. They say, look, I don't think you've thought this through. And that doesn't always land nicely. It doesn't make us feel all warm and fuzzy. And it might just, however, make us a bit defensive. We might immediately go to our thoughts like, you assume that I'm always impulsive, or you don't trust me to make my own decisions. But this is where you can sail, S-A-I-L. First, you slow down and you take a breath instead of firing back. Then you ask what matters. You could say, well, what's making you feel like I haven't thought this through? Maybe they're worried about the stress that it could create, or it could be that they're worried about the impact that it would have on your relationship. Then we investigate our assumptions. You notice that you heard their words as you're irresponsible. So you ask, are you worried that I'm being reckless, or are you worried about what this could mean for us? Now you're talking about the actual concern instead of arguing with the meaning that you assumed was behind their words. And lastly, you look for opportunities to learn. Maybe you will still make the same decision, but perhaps you realize there's a practical question you haven't answered yet. It could be that you need a stronger plan. It might be that you need to explain yourself more clearly why this decision is important to you. It could be that you learn the other person is not going to support this choice in the way that you had hoped, but that still gives you useful information about the relationship as well. None of this means you have to give up control of the helm. It just means you're not sailing straight into the rocks because you were too busy trying to prove that you knew what you were doing. Here's another example. Imagine your best friend says something about an issue that you feel strongly about, and you disagree with them immediately. You feel yourself tightening up. You want to correct them and you want to point out everything that they haven't considered or why you're right. But instead of responding right away, you slow down. You ask what experience has led you to see it that way. When they answer, you may still disagree with their conclusion, but you might learn something about what they have lived through or what they value. Then you investigate your assumption. Maybe you had assumed that they didn't care about the people affected by the issue, but perhaps they do care. They're simply focused on a different concern than you are. This is still useful information. Sale is not a perfect script. It's not the way to make everybody reasonable, and it's not a guarantee that every disagreement is going to end well. Think of it more as a compass. It helps you to remember that you have choices. You can slow down instead of reacting. You can ask questions instead of assuming based on your own experiences. You can look honestly at the story that you've been telling yourself and try to be open minded enough to accept perspectives that you didn't know or that you hadn't considered. And you can still set a boundary, step away, and hold your position if the conversation becomes disrespectful or harmful. You can use sale for 5 seconds in the middle of a conversation or after a conversation when you're alone and you're processing what happened. You could use it before a conversation you know is going to be difficult. The point isn't to do it perfectly. The point is to give yourself a different option than the old patterns. Instead of fighting, freezing, or disappearing, you slow down, ask what matters, and investigate your assumptions. Be open minded enough to look for an opportunity to learn. You don't have to surrender the helm when someone disagrees with you, but you can still ask what it is that they're seeing from their side of the ship. Now, as we get ready to wrap this up, I want to come back to the main idea behind this episode. Someone disagreeing with you doesn't automatically mean that they're against you. It doesn't automatically mean they don't respect you. And it doesn't automatically mean that you need to defend yourself, prove yourself, or convince them that you are right. Now, that doesn't mean that every disagreement is going to be healthy. It doesn't mean every person deserves access to your time, your energy, and your emotional space. Some people aren't interested in understanding you. Some people are only interested in winning. Some people will use disagreement as a way to shame you, control you, or make you question your own value. You don't have to stay in those conversations. You don't have to debate your humanity. You don't have to keep trying to earn respect from someone who only offers it when you agree with them. But when disagreement is respectful enough to stay in, it can give us something valuable. It can show us an angle that we didn't see. It can help us to notice an assumption that we're making, and it can give us a better understanding of a person in front of us. Sometimes it can help us to understand ourselves just a little more honestly, and that's not always comfortable. Being challenged rarely feels warm and fuzzy. It can make us defensive. It can make us want to explain ourselves quickly. It can bring up old experiences where being wrong felt embarrassing or unsafe, or like it would cost us a connection with someone that's important to us. But discomfort isn't always danger. Sometimes discomfort is just feeling our perspective getting a little bigger, and that is worth remembering. You don't have to agree with someone to learn from them. You don't have to abandon your own values to understand why someone sees things differently. You don't have to surrender the helm just because another person points to something on the horizon that you didn't notice. You can listen, you can ask questions, you can check your assumptions, and you can look for opportunities to learn, and you can still decide where it is that you stand. That's what SAIL is there for. Slow down, ask what matters, investigate your assumptions, and look for opportunities to learn. Not because you have to do it perfectly, and not because every disagreement will lead to somewhere good, but because it gives you more options. Instead of reacting to the first feeling that shows up, instead of fighting until someone gives in, or shutting down and disappearing, or just agreeing to make the tension stop, you can pause, you can listen to understand, and you can stay connected to yourself, and you can decide how much of that conversation deserves your time and energy. So this week, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. The next time someone disagrees with you, whether it's about something big or something small, I want you to pay attention. I want you to notice your first reaction. What is your first impulse? Are you wanting to explain? Do you want to correct them? Do you want to leave and go hide? Do you want to get louder and verbally force them to submit? I just want you to notice it. You don't have to fix it in that moment. You don't have to turn every disagreement into a deep philosophical conversation. Just maybe take a breath before you respond. Take time to ask one question before you make an assumption. Let yourself consider that the other person may be seeing something that you can't see from where you're standing. And if the conversation is respectful enough to continue, see if there's something you can learn, because they're not automatically right, but neither are you. None of us has the entire picture alone. And hey, if the conversation isn't respectful, if it does become harmful, if it becomes about control or humiliation instead of understanding, remember, you are allowed to step away. You're allowed to set a boundary. You should set a boundary. You're allowed to say that I've heard you, but I'm not willing to continue this conversation. That's not giving up. That's taking care of yourself. We don't grow by refusing to look beyond our own horizon. We grow when we learn how to hold both things at the same time. We can be open-minded without being unprotected, and we can be curious without being naive. We can be firm and avoid becoming cruel, and we can hear another perspective without losing our own perspective. Thank you for taking this time with me this week. I hope this episode gives you a little more space the next time you find yourself in a disagreement. Space to slow down, space to think, space to decide how you want to respond. So until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and remember, you don't have to surrender the helm, but you can still ask what someone else sees from their spot on the ship. Take care, everybody. I am Lee Perry. I am the Pirate Therapist, and I wish you all very good sailing.